Thank you for tuning in to CITR 101.9 FM. You're listening to Democracy Watch, the News Collective's weekly hour-long news report, bringing you alternative and undercovered current affairs coverage from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. I am Ryan Patrick Jones.
And I am Rahmatullah Sheikh. It's Thursday, January the 4th. It's about 5:03. We're broadcasting from UBC's Vancouver campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. Today's Democracy Watch presents an exclusive report from an anti-eviction event on Tuesday. The Vancouver Tenants Union and the Belvedere Residents Association held a protest against the pending eviction of a long-time tenant. This eviction is part of a growing trend of evictions through coercion and targeting seniors and vulnerable tenants.
We will then turn to a review of Democracy Watch in 2017. Myself, Rahmatullah, and collective leader Alex DeBoer will be discussing our favorite stories of 2017 and reflecting on local stories that were underreported. But first, headlines from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. BC Assessment releases property value estimates for 2017. BC Assessment released its latest round of assessments this week. The government agency is charged with placing a value on over 2 million properties across the province each year for tax purposes. According to BC Assessment, property values went up the most in Langley and Maple Ridge, rising by 19% and 17.5% respectively. In Vancouver, Burnaby, and Richmond, values rose by between 5% and 7%. The increases this year in Greater Vancouver were far less than those seen last year, when assessed values jumped by 20 to 50% in different areas. The most notable trend is that stratas increased in value by more than single-family homes, reversing a trend of explosive growth for single-family homes over the past several years. Tom Davidoff, a UBC professor who specializes in real estate, told CBC Radio that condo prices are rising because of the affordability crisis. As the price of homes rose over the past few years, more people were priced out of the market and forced to consider lower-cost options such as stratas and condos, placing upward pressure on prices at the lower end of the market. The property assessments are important for homeowners because they determine how much property tax they will pay this coming year. In general, those people whose property rose by more than the average in their local community will see an increase in their tax bill. However, those homeowners whose property has increased by less than the average may see a decrease in their municipal taxes. Homeowners can appeal their assessments to BC Assessment until January 31st.
Man injured in hatchet attack at Surrey Mall. A 34-year-old man was arrested outside the Surrey Central Mall after attacking a 50-year-old man with a hatchet. Police responded to a call around noon today and found both the suspect and the victim. The suspect was taken into custody and the victim was brought to a local hospital with injuries that are not considered serious. The motive was unknown at this point, but the two men are said to have been familiar with each other.
Vancouver taxi company disciplined for discrimination. The Blacktop Cabs taxi company was ordered to pay $24,000 by the BC Human Rights Tribunal after discriminating against one of its taxi drivers. According to the Georgia Straight, the driver was injured while driving a van taxi after being rear-ended by a car. Upon being injured, the driver provided Blacktop Cabs with a doctor's note that clearly forbade him to push, pull, or lift anything heavier than 10 pounds. But instead of accommodating the driver's needs, a supervisor at the company tried to force him to accept wheelchair passengers, contrary to the doctor's orders. The driver was yelled at and suspended twice after declining to pick up wheelchair passengers. Blacktop was ordered to pay $15,000 for injury to dignity, $7,781 for wage loss, $500 in costs, and $200 for expenses incurred by the driver.
Vancouverites rally to support Iran protests. As many as 21 are dead as protests continue to swell in Iran. On Monday, 4 days after Iran's protests started over rising inflation and economic woes, Vancouverites held a support rally on the steps of the Vancouver Art Gallery. Iran's last mass protest occurred almost a decade ago after the 2009 presidential elections. This protest resulted in police killings, mass arrests, and a wave of political refugees. The December protests began on Thursday in Iran's second largest city, that's Mashhad, and the slogan was "No to high prices," with many criticizing austerity cuts backed by the International Monetary Fund. As these protests spread, the original message broadened to include opposition to the government itself. Now, since Wednesday, pro-government supporters have also started protesting, while the authorities try to create a sense of stability and support for their rule in Iran. Anti-government unrest has spread to the countryside. Another rally in solidarity with Iranian protesters will be held at 1 p.m. on Saturday, January the 6th, in front of the Vancouver Art Gallery again.
English Bay oil spill case finally reaches courts. The Crown says that it will proceed in court with 10 charges against the Marathasa and Alasia concerning one of the largest oil spills in the history of Vancouver. The case will be tried over whether or not the defendants are present, as they have refused to show up in court so far. On April 8, 2015, the Marathasa, a grain freighter docked in English Bay, began leaking toxic fuel into the water. It resulted in a leak of 2,700 liters, of which the Canadian Coast Guard was able to retrieve around 80%. Although it has been nearly 2 years, neither the ship nor its operating company, Alasia, have admitted to any liability or been convicted of any wrongdoing. It was only after a year of a lengthy investigation by Transport Canada that they were charged. But both parties have skipped court dates. Alasia has claimed that it has not properly been notified of the court dates, despite 3 attempts by prosecutors to reach them. One such attempt was to hand notice to a captain of a vessel operated by Alasia outside Nanaimo. However, the company says it was not a valid notification since the captain was not a contractor and not an employee of the company.
Those were the headlines. We're now going into a short break, but stay tuned for Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM.
The holidays got you down? Whether it's pressure to make it perfect, tension with loved ones, unfulfilled expectations, dissatisfaction at work, or unrest in the world at large, maybe combined with winter weather and darkening days, all of this can contribute to self-judgment and guilt, sadness, and lethargy. It's a tough time of year, and psychotherapist Jeffrey B. Rubin has 7 handy tips and tricks to help you out. 1. Connect with those you love. 2. Have realistic expectations. Seek good enough rather than perfect. 3. Cherish what you're grateful for. 4. Build in what helps you flourish. 5. Create healthy boundaries with loved ones. 6. Constructively address family conflicts through empathetic listening and compassionate feedback. And 7. Help those in need. Good luck out there, and I'm proud of you.
Are you in need of any assistance today, sir?
No.
I could help you cross the street.
No.
I could help you cross the
Tired of a world of no when you have so much to give?
CITR and Discord got you with an outlet for all that.
Volunteer Wednesdays are back in the CITR Lounge.
It's an open house for members like you who are looking to meet cool people and get into the station.
Join up, meet some folks, help some causes, or just hang the freak out.
At the CITR Discord Lounge from 1 to 3 every Wednesday for food and good times.
Well, I gotta help you cross something.
Having trouble finding affordable, fresh-baked goods and coffee? Come down to Agora Cafe located in the McMillan Building at UBC. There's also space available to study.
The UBC Concrete Canoe Team is a student engineering design team. Every year, we design, build, and race a canoe made entirely out of concrete. Whether you're in first year, fourth year, or anything in between, we would love to have you as a member. Check out our Facebook page, UBC Concrete Canoe, or our website, yesitfloats.com for more details.
Hey Matt, are you interested in joining a club that connects you with other musicians around campus?
Yeah, where would I find a club like that?
It's called the UBC Music Initiative. We host monthly events that feature student performances, fun games, and dank food.
That sounds killer. Where can I sign up?
Check out the UBC Music Initiative page on Facebook. We'll see you at our next event.
It's gonna be lit!
And we're back. This is Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. We just heard headlines from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, and now we'll hear some original reporting from an anti-eviction protest organized by the Vancouver Tenants Union and the Belvedere Residents Association. Take a listen.
This was a report by Alex DeBoer for Democracy Watch.
At this period in their lives to get
that means that we're saying thank you, we're giving welcoming, and so thank you for all the people gathered here today to bring justice for people in housing. But I'll just be saying this to honor the lands that we're on today is unceded colonial territory. It's not the city of Vancouver's place to tell people that they are not allowed to have housing as a right, because that's what it is.
At noon on Tuesday, January 2nd, the Vancouver Tenants Union and the Belvedere Residents Association gathered at Main and 10th in front of the Belvedere Court apartment building. The rally was in protest of the pending eviction of longtime resident Steve Williams, who has lived at the Belvedere for 27 years.
The tenants of the Belvedere, with the support of the Vancouver Tenant Union, would like to collectively show their solidarity with Steve Williams. We appreciate and value Steve's presence in our building and are angered by the news of his impending eviction. Throughout the past 2 years, the landlords of the Belvedere and their agents have made it clear to us that they plan to evict each and every one of us from our homes through whatever means available to them. They have made it increasingly difficult to comply with their terms for rent payment. They have made our lives in the building increasingly intolerable by turning it into a perpetual construction site with no standards of cleanliness, timeliness, and quiet enjoyment. They have withheld basic utilities with unreasonable frequency. We have been collectively harassed and intimidated by their agents, who have succeeded in causing several vulnerable tenants to terminate their leases for various reasons, including fear of physical retaliation, fear of calls to mental health services, and frustration with living conditions. We have been collectively seeking to fight back against this process of divide and conquer, but have been dismayed to watch as the beloved elders of our building have been singled out in particular. Seniors are targeted due to their long-term tenancies, which, due to a lack of broader rent control, means that they are some of the only tenants with affordable rents. This is why the province and the city need to work to find better methods of supporting Vancouver's senior tenants. We cannot continue to watch as increasing numbers of currently housed seniors become homeless.
Our next speaker is Liam McClure. Liam is an advocate with the Vancouver Tenants Union and has been responsible for helping Steve Williams with his RTV arbitration.
The Vancouver Tenants Union assisted Steve Williams with his arbitration at the residential tenancy branch
though success there is unlikely due to the highly punitive provisions of the Residential Tenancy Act surrounding late payment of rent.
Liam McClure discusses the potential eviction faced by Steve Williams. Williams had an agreement with the previous building owners to pay his rent whenever he was able to during the month. However, new building administration issued him an eviction notice for repeated late payments. Liam talks about bribes, intimidation, and coercion that have been used to end tenant residencies at the Belvedere. He says this is part of a larger trend in Vancouver, and it particularly affects seniors.
For low-income working people. We need stronger tenant protections for seniors as well as tenants facing homelessness. Seniors typically have longer tenure and lower rents, creating incentive to turn their suites over to the market. This highlights the most important point, is that we need a regime of real rent control in British Columbia, tying rents to the unit rather than the tenant. Real rent control will entirely disincentivize the abusive practices we are witnessing and retain what limited affordability remains in the city. In the absence of decisive actions from the province, there are steps the City of Vancouver could take unilaterally within their own authority. Strengthening the tenant relocation and protection policy, disclosing city permits to affected renters, and attaching anti-displacement language to city permits are all measures which could prevent or deter rent evictions.
Pat is going to come up and speak. Pat has faced some of the same issues that Steve has faced. Steve is not able to be with us today because he's feeling a great deal of intimidation from our landlord, who has intimidated a lot of us in the building. But Pat is going to speak to his own experience of being intimidated in a similar situation.
I just went through an eviction notice, went through the Residential Tenancy Board. They were trying to get a bunch of tenants out of our building, about 9 units.
Pat Perino, a local Vancouver renter, corroborates Liam's observations of rent eviction tactics used by Vancouver landlords. He says his landlords tried to evict him from his suite based on water damage that did not exist. With help from the Vancouver Tenants Union, Pat brought his case to arbitration and won. Democracy Watch had a chance to speak with both Pat Perino and Vancouver Tenants Union member Liam McClure after the event.
My name is Perino, Pat Perino.
Yeah, and you're a tenant at the Belvedere?
No, I'm not a tenant at the Belvedere. I'm a tenant at 1650 East 5th Avenue, which is called the New Orleans Court. It's called. The building is called New Orleans Court, but the owner there is evicting about 8 people, and I'm the only one left of the 8 units that decided not to agree with him and disputed the tenancy to the eviction notice, whereas the other ones, because they were much younger, and I've been there 13 or 14 years, going on 14 years now, and so my rent is a little bit lower than market, I guess, but not by that much, because I'm paying close to $1,000 a month. I no idea why they want to increase the rents, of course, by renovating the place, but that's about it. That's.
So you mentioned when you spoke at the event today that the landlord said there was water damage in all these 8 units, but you had help from the tenants union to fight against that?
I did, yes. As a matter of fact, there's a couple of people here now that helped me in building our case, basically our dispute resolution, I guess, is what the Residential Tenancy Board called it. We basically just filed our side of the story, and they seem to agree with it. It wasn't the first time, actually, I've taken this landlord to the board. One of the times was because they changed the windows and the sliding glass doors from single glazed to double glazed, and they wanted to increase the rent by $56 a month because it was our benefit. But really, it was the benefit of the owner.
Are you a member of the tenants union?
In a sense, yes.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that I haven't paid any dues, but I've become a member as I was asked to be a member, so I said sure.
I'm just curious, have you seen other forms of organizing similar to the Tenants Union in Vancouver?
Actually, no, and I'm thinking it's about time that there is such a thing as a tenants union, because there are so many tenants. Not everybody owns their place. A bunch of people rent, and it's about time that someone represented them.
Here's Liam McClure. On your Facebook event, it said that the Belvedere is like a third of the units are empty.
Yeah.
So is the current goal right now to empty out all the units and then rent-evict?
Well, it seems to be an unclear strategy. They've been evicting people for various reasons. They've told people in the past that there's going to do a mass eviction to clear the building either for sale or renovation. But yeah, at this point they're just sitting on the empty units and sort of getting people by attrition. So
yeah. Kind of like one-on-one kind of pressures.
Yeah. So we arbitrated an attempted eviction, which we were successful on earlier in the summer, due to a specific issue that dealt with 3 suites. And then this is the first one where we've seen a tenant evicted ostensibly for cause. And then there's been a number of other situations where tenants they're taking advantage of the pressure they could put on tenants to accept financial incentives to leave. So we lost another tenant recently in a similar situation to Steve, who just couldn't handle the pressure anymore, and she took a buyout for in my opinion, much less than she should have. So it's really sort of a matter of trying to evict the tenants one by one.
Did Steve get a buyout as well?
Steve was one of the tenants. He told me that he was never approached about a buyout, so that's the only tenant I've heard of that happening. And I think that may have been intentional because they've noticed that Steve had this pattern, which was accepted in the past, of paying rent with the old manager when he was able, and so maybe they knew that they could eventually evict him for cause, so why bother paying him out when you could just evict him with no cost for cause.
Do you feel happy with today's event?
Yeah, I was pleased that people came out, and I'm glad this issue is getting more attention because the way the housing crisis in Vancouver really does affect seniors in a really serious way because it's their tenancy, their long-term low-rent tenancies, which are subject to the most market pressure to be ended, and they're the people who are on fixed incomes and have the least recourse at this period in their lives to get proper rehousing.
This was a report by Alex DeBoer for Democracy Watch.
That ship out there will be smashed to bits. Use your emergency equipment. It won't work. Nothing works. It's got to. It's no use. Everything seems to be stuck. My light's worth a try anyway. Come on, fellas. You can make it. Just listen to this. Spider-Man saves freighter. You can't tell me the captain couldn't have brought his ship in without the help of that publicity-seeking show-off, Spider-Man.
Don't get caught wasting power. Unplug cell phone, camera, and other battery chargers when charging is complete. Many electronic devices continue to use power even when you are not operating them. The amount of energy consumed by electronics in a year when they were not in use could power Whistler Blackcomb Resorts for 43 years. This Power Smart play brought to you by BC Hydro Power Smart and CITR 101.9 FM.
Hey there, my name is Callum Ming, the Executive Director of BC Athlete Voice. We are an athlete-focused organization helping British Columbia's athletes become their best. How do we do that? Well, if you're a BC athlete, we can help you with pretty much everything related to leadership, advocacy, and education. For example, we can help you find funding, start a new athlete group, or develop better public speaking skills. It's all at bcathletevoice.ca. And don't forget to look for us on Twitter and Facebook by searching BC Athlete Voice. Check it out.
What newspapers and magazines did you regularly read to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what ones specifically?
All of them.
Want to know more than Sarah Palin? Join CITR's Current Affairs Coordinator Alex DeBoer every Tuesday from 4 to 5 p.m. in room 2514 in the AMS Nest to learn best practices for covering local current affairs topics for radio. The weekly training sessions will cover writing for radio, determining newsworthiness, media ethics, interviewing, writing balanced stories, and more.
And we're back. This is Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. We just heard an original report from an anti-eviction protest at the Belvedere Court apartment earlier this week. We will now turn our attention to a 2017 roundup of the News Collective's favorite stories. Since the current iteration of Democracy Watch and the News Collective has only been around for 3 months, we will be focusing on our reporting since October. To start off this conversation, we will be talking about a story that the News Collective did on CBC's Digital First Strategy. My fellow News Collective member Ryan Patrick Jones will tell us a bit about this piece, and then we will hear a clip.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm Ryan Patrick Jones. I've been with you since October, the beginning of this current iteration of Democracy Watch. So I believe it was late October of this year, CBC President and CEO Hubert Lacroix came to the campus here at the University of British Columbia to speak to the journalism students. He has been president of CBC for the last 10 years, and he's actually on his way out. So he's out now. So basically December 31st would have been his last day. So he came, of course, he had his legacy in mind. He was thinking about how he would be remembered. And basically he came to evangelize about the CBC's digital first strategy. So as we know, the CBC has been the national public broadcaster for countless years. I don't have that fact for you, but
countless years.
It's been a mainstay of journalism, of entertainment in TV, radio in Canada and in the mind of Canadians for many years. And they were kind of blindsided by the internet, basically, as many traditional news organizations were. And they struggled to catch up, basically. It's a massive organization that's countrywide, lots of bureaucracy. Things can't just change overnight. And so one of the biggest initiatives that CBC President Hubert Lacroix undertook during his tenure was this switch where they changed the priorities of the public broadcaster from being a TV and radio first organization to being a digital first organization. And actually in his speech to the journalism students, he mentioned that they now consider mobile as their number one priority, followed by digital, so their website, and then followed by radio and TV. So he spoke to the journalism students, and we did an interview with him, and then we also followed up with the UBC professor Taylor Owen, who is a professor of digital media at UBC. It was a very fascinating and great opportunity for me as a student journalist.
Thanks, Ryan. Let's go to a clip from that piece.
Recently, I read an article by Franklin Foer in The Atlantic. He's the former editor of The New Republic, where he kind of argues that media organizations have been overtaken by a Silicon Valley ethos. And similarly, in The Walrus, Tom Jokinen mentions that CBC gives a lot of prominence to chartbeat metrics, which measure digital traffic on news websites. I'm just wondering, do you think the pursuit of growing audiences has distracted the CBC from its mandate to report on issues of national importance?
I don't think so, not at all. I think what it has done is it gives us an idea of whether the story is compelling, and whether the way we told the story is compelling, and whether we are actually reaching Canadians and having a conversation about what they care. And you got to remember that I said a few seconds ago in the chat with your colleagues, 85 or 86% of Canadians still watch television in a linear way. And we have a whole bunch of people listening to radio. I mean, 21 of the 26 markets that are measured by BBM, we're in the #1 radio morning program. What does that mean? It means, yes, the social platforms are there, the digital platforms are there, but we can't forget the more traditional audiences, and it's the combination of both of our involvement in social media and the traditional audiences that makes us the broadcaster that we are.
Thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
No problem.
So you've written a book about the disruptions caused by digital technologies in the areas of politics and global affairs. What major changes has the digital disruption brought to the practice of journalism?
Where to start? So many. I mean, the biggest single change in the journalism space was that it used to be that to reach large, broad audiences, you needed an industrial production capability. So you needed to be a broadcaster or a newspaper with delivery trucks or a radio station with access to radio spectrum, right? You needed the industrial capacity to reach large numbers of people. And that's just not the case anymore. Anybody can reach anybody. And anybody can have an audience. And that's fundamentally challenged the monopoly that professionals and big institutions had over journalism. So we're seeing the repercussions of that now, I think.
Right. And so the traditional business model for media organizations is seeming to be obsolete.
Yeah.
So how has this broken economic model affected the quality of journalism in Canada?
I mean, it's interesting. It depends how you define quality, right? I mean, it has fundamentally undermined the ability of large industrial journalism organizations to produce the kind of journalism they produced, right? And a lot of people think that's high quality, right? Mm-hmm. It's what we think of as 20th century relatively objective reporting-based journalism, right? And that is in decline because that model, there's far less money in that in that ecosystem, right? But a lot of that stuff wasn't good quality, right? There was a lot of bad journalism that happened inside this industrial model too, in part because it was so profitable, right? Because the margins were so huge inside this industry that it led to all sorts of sort of far more extreme versions of that journalism emerging, or just really bad, lazy journalism because they were making so much money. Right. So the hope of the internet was that now that many more people could make smaller amounts of money, or that the revenue sources were diversified and the voices were diversified, that you might get a broader range of types of content, and that might ultimately lead to more quality. I think for a time that probably existed, but now we're faced with some other challenges around reconsolidation inside platforms, inside Facebook and Google, which has caused sort of a second-order effect of this disruption.
Right. So the CBC has made a big transformation over the past years, switching to a digital-first business model with its Strategy 2020 plan. And in his talk at the Liu Institute, outgoing CEO President Hubert Lacroix proudly stated that the CBC was the #1 digital media company in Canada. Do you think it's a good choice for CBC to be in direct competition with other Canadian media organizations in the digital space?
So again, it means by what do you mean by competition, right? So if it's competition for content to people to choose what kind of content they consume, then absolutely. If it's in terms of business competition for the monetization of that consumption, then no.
So you're speaking about advertising specifically?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So CBC Digital, when it launched, made the decision, and they would say forced decision because of their revenue structure, they just didn't have extra funding to launch a whole new digital product.
Right.
So they monetized it. Okay. So they did what everybody was doing in the digital space, and the way you monetized media was to monetize traffic. Mm-hmm. So they sold ads against their traffic.
So that was Ryan Patrick Jones, our News Collective member, who was speaking to Hubert Lacroix and also Professor Taylor Owen. So, Ryan, first of all, I think we should rather recognize that this was like the first story we did in October, like the big original reporting. And it was sort of interesting to see the transition in the whole piece of how Hubert Lacroix, the outgoing president, or the former president of Radio Canada, making a passionate plea for more taxes per capita. And then we switch on to Professor Taylor Owen, who says, you know what, we actually needed a radical transformation of how CBC sees itself more as a content creator than a competitor to other mainstream outlets. So that was sort of interesting. What do you think?
I think it was a very important argument for him to make, especially with the death of local news that we are seeing across this country. I mean, just last month in Ontario, Torstar and Post Media swapped a bunch of local community newspapers and shut down a bunch of them. And so these are kind of in many cities and many towns, the only source of local news. And so what Taylor Owen was saying is that CBC needs to fill that gap, basically. And I think I agreed with that in many ways. But, implementing that is a different question.
Yeah, so I think the one thing that we can definitely leave with this is there are no certain answers to where the future leads us. We do have a digital first strategy, but there are so many questions looming over this whole digital first strategy. So I guess this whole piece, this is exactly what I've learned from this whole reporting and from joining you while producing this piece.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the next piece that we did, and Alex DeBoer will tell us which one is it that we pick from our reporting in 2017.
Yeah, we have a few stories to go over, and I think the one we'll go to next is some original reporting we did on Vancouver's Me Too rally. So let's hear a clip from that, and then we will talk a bit more about it.
Allies! Allies! No more! No more! Silence! No more!
The Me Too movement vaulted from the feeds of social media users to the streets of Vancouver on Saturday. UBC students and alumni were among the 100 people who braved snow flurries and sub-zero temperatures to rally outside the Vancouver Art Gallery, calling for an end to sexual violence. Sophia Stevenson, a UBC student studying biology and chemistry, said,
And I know many people, and I personally have experienced sexual assault, so I think it's an important cause to be rallying for.
The event featured the voices of sexual assault survivors. It was organized by the Vancouver chapter of March on Canada in solidarity with similar marches held in Toronto and Los Angeles. The event sought to build momentum for the broad Me Too movement. Jody Ortega, co-organizer and host of the rally, said it's important for people to take action beyond the realm of the internet. One of the themes of the event was that sexual assault affects people of different ages, races, and genders. Judy Lewinson of Black Voices Vancouver spoke at the event, saying,
Many of us gathered here today are the survivors. Ours is a heartbreaking tapestry of sexual harassment and other violations far too horrific to politely recall. Some of us gathered here today are part of the incredible support system, adding strength and volume to our eclectic voices as we rightfully eliminate inexcusable transgressions and lay forth a non-negotiable demand for the culture and the hierarchy that has enabled this behavior to finally change.
And we're back with Democracy Watch. On CITR 101.9 FM. So we just heard a clip from some original reporting we did back in November. I believe that was aired on November 4th. Or the rally took place on November 4th. And so that was a Me Too rally in solidarity with sexual assault survivors in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver. So we have both the reporters from that piece here today in the studio. So we have Aidan Tong and Ryan Patrick Jones. So starting out, it's been a couple months since you reported on this story, and there have been developments in this saga of Me Too and the general speaking out against sexual assault internationally and locally. So I'm wondering, looking back on this piece, what do you see has changed since then in this movement? If you were to report on it now, do you feel like there have been certain reactions or changes taken to rectify the status quo?
I think what was interesting about the actual protest was that it moved from the digital social media to people actually coming out and supporting it. And I think it's becoming more of an issue, and it's becoming more of a conversation, especially with a lot of with stuff like Weinstein and a lot of cases of sexual assault. I think what needs to change is the disparity of response when it comes to women of color and white women, because again, this whole Me Too thing started with an African American woman, and nothing ever happened, and then we have a few actresses that are white that get sexually assaulted, and then it becomes a huge thing. And I'm not saying that all I'm saying is there should be a proper response for everyone of every race.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. I mean, I'm very conscious that we are both two males covering this. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a female reporter at this. But at the same time, my observation, what I'm struck by is this is just the beginning. The floodgates have opened and things are happening. But at the same time, so far it's been mostly the elite women who have been, who have been able to get recourse, whether that is getting their boss fired or bringing down powerful men who have abused them. So as Aidan said, I think there needs to be a bit of a catch-up with more, minorities and underrepresented groups and not, rich actresses and other women who are members of the elite, I would say, of our society.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think to use a platform, for a powerful person to use a platform to spread good, it's always significant, and I think it's always influential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when I first heard this piece, hearing some of the narration you did, Aidan, that reflects on this issue being one that doesn't discriminate based on gender and race and class. And while that's true, it's also not true based on, what we were just talking about. People with privilege are able to see more justice or at least have their voices heard. So I'm wondering, at the event, was the message... was it one of comment on that disparity between when people of privilege make allegations of sexual assault and people who are more vulnerable? Did they address that more in the rally?
That was definitely a significant element at the rally, and especially when we interviewed Jennifer Berdal, a UBC professor. She pointed that out, and she actually alluded to the comment I just made earlier about how the Me Too rally was created by a woman of color before, but the response was never given the same as to what it is today. But yeah, I mean, it's an extremely important movement. No matter what response that we're getting, it's always good that there's a positive response that's happening right now.
Yeah, so in terms of the rally itself, there were definitely speakers who definitely pointed out that disparity. But I think the general message of the rally itself was one of unity in support of survivors. So, and that was the main message, is that it doesn't matter if you're a rich white woman or a poor black woman or an indigenous person or a male. I mean, there was a male survivor of sexual assault as well who was a speaker. So I think the main message was that sexual assault doesn't discriminate. We are victims. We are here to speak, and let's listen.
Yeah, totally. And looking at the hyper-local, and I'm not sure if we did cover this. I think we did talk about this a bit, but in the Vancouver music scene, there were all those sort of DJs and influential individuals, some musicians, some DJs, some organizers who were called out for sexual assault, and there was a list that was published. And I don't think we should say any names, but it's interesting as myself being someone who's in that scene to see how much it's shaken things up and how those people have really been I don't think any of them have been brought to trial. These are all allegations, but they've really been ostracized, and it's really I don't know, it's really changed the way people look at one another in the scene. So I don't know if either of you have had a chance to report on that more specifically, like the music scene allegations.
I haven't specifically, but a colleague of mine, Mel Woods, has. She wrote an article for the Thunderbird about it, and she basically spoke to some of the community groups who were trying to respond to it. They were more involved with the response and trying to root out this kind of behavior in the music community in downtown Vancouver. And from her reporting, there was a meeting being planned, which I believe took place around Christmas time. And they were trying to develop standards, I think, for that all of the nightclubs and the different venues that would then hopefully voluntarily follow and implement. Not 100% sure of the results of that meeting, but maybe that's a story for next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So let's move on to another story now. I'd like to play a clip from some coverage done at a Marpole protest against modular housing for the homeless. So we are just going to hear a clip, and then we will have a conversation about this story.
Can you start by telling me your name?
Jean Swanson.
Hello, Jean Swanson. So what brings you here today?
So I live in Hastings Sunrise, and right close to 2 supportive housing places. And they've been there for about 3 years, and there's no problems.
Right.
So I just thought if I could add that reality to this conversation, it might be helpful.
And so why do you think people are opposed to something like this?
I think it's prejudice. There's a lot of prejudice against homeless people and low-income people.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what would you say to those people if you had a chance to talk to them?
I would say just what I just said, that I live in a neighborhood that has 2 supportive housing places and everything's fine.
Counter-protesters disrupted the welcoming rally, citing the dangers of housing homeless people who may be drug users across the street from an elementary school.
What brings you here today?
Are
you a Marpole resident?
Yes.
Okay, what brings you here today?
The reason is very simple. We don't want to see in the future in the students' playground, there's a lot of the broken glass, and we don't want to see in the future one day the children in the school to be hit by the needles.
So
yes, a very simple reason.
So you're afraid of drug use?
Yes, right.
What? Okay, so why are you afraid of that?
Well, I can answer that because
Yeah,
I don't think the city provided enough information for everybody to be sure that this site will be better. Okay, and the info sections that they organized, I can say it's very poorly. People's question never answered properly, and just ask people to keep up.
Okay, so that was a clip from a piece that Democracy Watch did on a temporary housing unit that was being built in Marpole across the street from an elementary school. And as a result of this modular housing, some local residents, many of them who are Chinese immigrants, were voicing their opposition because they feared for the safety of the elementary school children. So I wasn't there reporting this story. It was Christina and Ryan, who I have with me here. But I did help edit this together. And I find that this piece, one thing that really struck me about it was the nuance that was left out of the story by so much of the other local media. For example, the story was quite consistently portrayed as xenophobic. Chinese immigrants oppose like homeless people, and it wasn't really that simple at all. I think actually a lot of the audio we kept in, a lot of the conversations, Ryan, that you had with a lot of the protesters really showed that it wasn't that simple, and people weren't simply being hateful of homeless people or drug users. It was actually coming from a place of deep fear. So I don't know, maybe you two could speak a little bit about that, Christina and Ryan.
So what I noticed about the deal protests were that although I fundamentally disagree and I think that there should be more housing for people who are vulnerable, I think the grievance that the Chinese community felt about the process of building housing there in their area, it's very genuine, and I think they also feel like they were railroaded in the process. They were never given a chance to publicly voice or have any discussion about, what the concerns are.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we heard from all of them. They were mostly concerned about the process itself. While there was a fear for the safety of their children, of course, because it was across from an elementary school, when confronted with that, they always kind of went back to this argument about process. The city didn't consult them. It didn't follow its own procedures. As Christina said, they definitely felt railroaded. And to get you to your point, and not to toot our own horn a little bit, but I think what we were able to add that nuance because we stuck around for several hours, from the beginning. Like we were originally there to cover the rally in support of the modular housing and the homeless people moving into it, held by the Marpole Students for Modular Housing. But then a counter protest started up, and the CBC and the other national news organizations that were there missed that second protest because they came in, they got their clips, and they left, basically. And then after that, an injunction was brought, and city officials showed up, and the police showed up, and we were the only ones there, us, two reporters from CITR. Right? So I think that's kind of how we were able to add that nuance into the story.
Yeah, I was joking with Ryan on the day of the protest that in the beginning there were more reporters than there were protesters for the first 10 minutes. And then, of course, the ratio changed dramatically when CTV got their soundbite and then they left. But after that, the fact that one man was willing to be arrested by police because there was an injunction against the protest, and the way that this community felt like they were choked and that they weren't getting a proper hearing from the public. I mean, I think that was something that was left out of the discourse completely.
Yeah, totally. And I think while you two are pointing out that a lot of these protesters felt railroaded, and they were, in a way, the city didn't consult with them appropriately. But I think the issue really comes down to society being socialized to be so deeply afraid of drugs and to fear them so much, both in Canada and apparently in China. And that, so we have different societies that kind of, teach this rhetoric of the war on drugs, and then people respond with that rhetoric, and it becomes part of their beliefs. And then, the city is reprimanding them for having those beliefs. So, it's kind of like we teach people these lessons, and then once they learn them, we punish them. So I feel like that was something that was also left out a lot of stories in the media. But maybe we should leave. Or Ryan, did you have something else to say?
That's deep.
That's deep, man. Well, so, okay, we're going to go to another story that I think some of the News Collective members are itching to talk about. This is a story we did on the Palestine rally that happened a couple weeks ago downtown Vancouver in front of the art gallery. So we're going to hear a clip, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So stay tuned here.
Free, free Palestine! From the river to the sea! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free! Palestine will...
We gave you a place to stay when you need it, and then you stole it! And then you stole it!
You believe with occupation or no? This is the bottom line. This is the bottom line. We live in 21st century, and shaming you as a human being support occupation.
I think that
you
we
go
should be
check
able
the
to...
checkpoints. You live there. I live there. You go check the checkpoints. How human? How dare you? You support occupation till now.
All right, so that was a clip from CITR Democracy Watch's coverage of a pro-Palestinian rally in opposition to U.S. President Donald Trump's random and sudden recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So we had the two reporters who were there, Aidan Tong and Rematullah Sheikh. We would just like to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, so we also have Alex DeBoer in the studio. So this was a story which pretty much consumed 3 reporters from CITR. It kind of gives you an idea of the magnitude of the event and the opposition that we witnessed in Vancouver downtown. So, for me, what really stood out of this whole coverage was the extent the depth to which we tried to explore this whole issue. And the clip that we just heard was this little skirmish that Alex DeBoer actually caught on the sidelines of that protest. And it sort of gave us an idea of how complicated and how protracted the whole problem is, and the various layers of friction and troubles in this whole issue. What about you, Aiden? What really stood out of you when you were reporting this?
What actually stood out about for me was just the passion from the whole protest and the whole march. What I found, because I'm studying the conflict. Well, I studied in first semester, and what I found was a lot of the pro-Palestine people were yelling for an intifada, but a lot of people interpreted that as another war. But what it actually signifies is for peaceful civil protest. And I mean, in the summer, I was at a protest against the alt-right at City Hall, and there were thousands gathered there. I think this protest, however, I just had so much passion to it, and I think the whole intrinsic value of a home for Arabs and then for Jews there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hatred.
I just wanted to jump in to ask one question, because we're running out of time, that I think is important to discuss, is how this issue, which is so international, so global, so far away, it's in the Middle East, right? How this affects the local. And I know that, Aiden, you did an interview with someone from Hillel House, and we interviewed a couple people about this issue, Palestinian student. We also interviewed a rabbi for Independent Jewish Voices. So I'm wondering, how does Trump's decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem affect the local students at UBC, people living in Vancouver?
Well, to be honest, a lot of the Palestinian students that I spoke to that are at UBC, they did tell me that there's a clear lack of rights that they have for themselves. There's also a very different response with the groups at UBC, specifically to do with the BDS, which have had several restrictions on them at UBC. There's still a pending, I don't know specifically about this, but there's still a pending response on if they can kind of function at UBC. So I think it's really mind-boggling. I can't give the most consolidated answer, but I think when a lot of the international community speaks out against a decision like Trump's, even countries like China, I think there's a problem.
Yeah, this gives us a sense of how this event was reverberating across, and even in Vancouver, we saw that spillover coming in. So yeah, an important event that we covered in 2017.
All right, well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. Tune in next Thursday at 5 p.m. Every Thursday at 5 p.m. We're going to come at you with as much great, original, intrepid reporting as we can every week. Bye-bye, Vancouver.